federal spending. The Republican caucus will meet early this afternoon to talk about the way forward. U.S. House coming in next with live coverage here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. Once again, we come to ask you for wisdom, patience, peace, and understanding for the members of this people's house. At a time when once again strong sentiments stand in opposition, we ask discernment for the members that they might judge anew their adherence to principle, conviction, and commitment. Protect them from a deafness toward one another, lest they slide uncharitably toward an inability to work together to solve the important issues of our day. Give them the generosity of heart and the courage of true leadership to work toward a common solution which might call for compromise, even sacrifice on both sides. In the end, may we all, as Americans, be proud of the processes of elective democratic government. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to Section 103C of Public Law 108-83, the Speaker appoints Janice C. Robinson as Director of the Office of Interparliamentary Affairs of the United States House of Representatives. Chair will entertain up to 15 one-minute requests on each side. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri rise? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm new to this House. New to politics, actually. I'm a small business owner. Ran my own business for 30 years. And when you have your own business, you get a lot of free, unsolicited advice. And most of that advice is telling you how to run your business. And back home, a fellow would tell you, after his 30-minute dissertation on how to run your business, he'd stop and revise and extend his remarks by saying, well, I guess I can run everybody's business but my own. Because usually they've been bankrupt a couple of times and been fired, but they want to tell you how to run your business. And when I hear the United States government say we need to create jobs, we need to tell the job creators how to operate, what to do, I'm reminded of the fellow back home that says I can run everybody's business but my own. Because we haven't had a budget in this country in over 850 days. We don't do much right up here, and trying to run business is not something we should be doing. We should be reducing taxes, reducing spending, reducing regulation, and we need to get those 3 free trade agreements from the White House over here. If you don't believe me, ask the European Union. Car exports up over 200% after they signed their free trade agreement with Korea. Their aircraft and machine is up over 2,300%. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise? And the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last week, we passed a bill to extend funding for critical highway and transit infrastructure projects for 6 months. I don't think 6 months is long enough. You know, we're told by businesses that they need certainty before they can invest. And the same is true for those businesses that would help us build an infrastructure that reflects the challenges of the 21st century. To give that certainty, we need to pass a long-term highway and transit funding bill now so we can create lasting jobs. You know, in my home city of Los Angeles, we're already pursuing innovative measures like the 3010 America Fast Forward initiative to get the infrastructure we need to stay competitive tomorrow built today. That initiative promises to create 160,000 jobs in my area alone. Just think of what that good program could do for our country as a whole. A long-term bill will put us one step closer to realizing that goal. Keeping our nation competitive in the future requires vision and boldness in the present, and I urge my colleagues to pass a long-term surface transportation bill equal to the opportunity before us. Thank you. I yield my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, today I rise to honor one of our former colleagues, a woman who is really an institution in South Florida, in Florida, and in the nation. And that is, of course, Congresswoman Carrie Meek. You know, she was the first African-American elected to the Florida Senate, the first African-American woman elected to the Florida Senate in 1982, and then, along with two other colleagues, became the first African-American to be elected from Florida to the U.S. Congress since Reconstruction. But here's what I know and remember about Carrie Meek. She is the consummate stateswoman. She's a person who loves her country. She loves this institution. And it doesn't matter what party you're from. Whenever you have a need, whenever you have an issue, when you want counsel, she's the person that to this day we continue to go to. So today, again, Madam Speaker, I'm here to honor a great woman, a great stateswoman, a person who in the state of Florida is revered by Republicans and Democrats alike. Her son followed her into Congress, Kendrick Meek, and he did a wonderful job, and also comes from that great tree that is Carrie Meek. So today, again, I'm here to honor Carrie Meek. Carrie, we love you, we miss you, we honor you. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to honor the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Peace Corps. And today, over 1,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers are here in our capital to bring us the attention that the Peace Corps deserves. Congress passed legislation authorizing the Peace Corps and giving it a mandate to, quote, promote peace and friendship. Since then, 200,000 Americans, including myself and Congress members Tom Petri, Mike Honda, and John Garamendi, have served our great country in the name of peace and friendship. I am so proud that 18 volunteers currently are serving from my district in California, and they include Jonathan Cotham from Monterey, who's producing 500 environmental educational books in El Salvador, which will help 6,300 folks in local schools. Joshua Tisselman from Salinas, he's teaching English in Madagascar and has an English language radio station. Just now, there are 8,655 Americans currently serving in 80 countries. But Peace Corps service doesn't end when you leave the country. This weekend, more than 1,300 Peace Corps volunteers are here in Washington, D.C. They are the advocates for peace and prosperity and goodwill that the Peace Corps embodies. Join me in making the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps truly an opportunity to serve our country. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, solving this nation's crushing unemployment problem has been my focus since the people of eastern and southeastern Ohio sent me to Washington to start the process of change. Today I rise to outline 5 specific actions we must accomplish to create economic certainty, give job creators the confidence they need to begin hiring again, and make American companies more competitive both here at home and globally. They are: require the federal government to balance its budget annually, scrap the current federal tax code and implement a flatter, fairer tax code, eliminate all pending federal regulations not directly tied to public health or national security, establish a clear national energy policy, and repeal the President's health care law. Now, I've discussed all this with countless residents of eastern and southeastern Ohio, and they all like what they hear. But the popularity of this agenda has little to do with me. These ideas are rooted in the American dream, and they can boost America's economy and lead to real job creation. If this administration wants to help us, we can start creating the jobs Ohio and America needs. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise? The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have asked some of my colleagues to join me today to pay tribute to a wonderful, wonderful stateswoman who represented Florida's 17th Congressional District for more than a decade, Congresswoman Carrie Pittman Meek. It is my present district, and as a part of the Congressional Black Caucus Legislative Conference, her colleagues are honoring her today for her distinguished service to Greater Miami, to Florida, and to this nation. In Congress, she focused on issues near and dear to her heart and her constituents, including economic development, education, affordable housing, and issues affecting Haiti and Haitian Americans. The Miami-Dade County community has shown its appreciation to her by naming an elementary school, a health clinic, a boulevard, a branch of a local college, and a community center in her honor. Congresswoman Meek once said, "Service is the price you pay for the space which God has let you occupy." I cannot think of someone who embodies this principle more than her. Thank you, Carrie Pittman Meek, for standing up for all of us, and we are all standing on your shoulders. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to the memory of Michael Cole, a distinguished New Jersey resident who died over the weekend and whose funeral will be held tomorrow in Morristown, Morris County. Michael was among New Jersey's most distinguished lawyers and public servants. He served as Governor Thomas Kaine's chief counsel in the 1980s and was very active heading the board of the New Jersey Legal Services Corporation. Michael was a mentor to more than a generation of New Jersey lawyers, including me, when I worked under his leadership in Governor Kaine's administration. Michael leaves his wife, Janie LaVecchia, a member of our state's highest tribunal, the New Jersey Supreme Court, as well as a daughter, Elise, and a son-in-law and granddaughter. The state of New Jersey has been enriched enormously by the life of Michael Cole. My wife, Heidi, and I mourn his loss, but join countless New Jerseyans in celebrating his wonderful life. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise? The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank Congresswoman Wilson for bringing us together today to honor a truly exceptional public servant and friend, Congresswoman Carrie Meek. Carrie Meek's record of accomplishments is truly too long to list, but her unique commitment to fighting for our most vulnerable communities is unmatched. And of course, there is no bigger supporter and protector of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security than Congresswoman Meek, who was a member of the Appropriations Committee, and she actually counseled me to seek a slot on that committee. So today we say thank you for fighting the good fight, and we applaud all of your service and your work, Carrie. Now, in this new chapter of your life, our young people continue to benefit from your wisdom through your foundation, which really deserves all of our support. Carrie was a friend of my mentor, our beloved Shirley Chisholm, and I miss sharing our memories of Shirley Chisholm. And I also remember so much wise counsel that Carrie gave to me. I remember her sound guidance and also her principled stands. And so today I join in celebrating the many ways in which her work and her spirit has contributed to the success and well-being of countless, countless people throughout South Florida, our country, and our world. I miss you, Carrie. I miss you especially during this Congressional Black Caucus ALC weekend. I miss your congressional classrooms. We love you. Thank you so much for your leadership. Believe you me, all of us are better people as a result of your being here for so long and your continuing to fight the good fight for our seniors and for our children.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
Address the House for 1 minute.
And the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise to join in my colleagues with their friendly comments about our former colleague from Florida, Carrie Meek. I first met Carrie when I was representing her brother, who was a retired military veteran and a highly decorated veteran. And that relationship ended when we laid him to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. But we really got to know each other well when I had the privilege of chairing the Appropriations Committee, and Carrie was a really great member of that Appropriations Committee. And I remember in some of the very tense moments which happened on occasion, she would always find some way to bring a little bit of light and a little bit of pleasure to relieve the tension that was there. And, you know, I used to say to Carrie, and we talked often, I would say, Carrie, why is it that I can never get you to vote right? And she says, you know, Chairman, I've been wondering the same thing about you, why I can never get you to vote right. Well, we had this great relationship. I miss her serving here because she brought a lot to the House. She brought a lot to the committee. And Carrie, like your other colleagues have mentioned, we really love you, and we really appreciate and respect your service to our great nation. And Madam Speaker, I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the end this week of Don't Ask, Don't Tell shows us that we have nothing to fear and can only gain by extending liberty and equality to all of our citizens. Brave young men and women will not be denied the opportunity to serve their country, and soldiers will be judged on their ability to do their jobs, not their sexual orientation. This is a great step forward, but some seem eager to step back. In North Carolina, there's a ballot initiative to amend the state constitution to ban same-sex marriage. This seems to be more about turning out the Republican political base than about marriage, and many of our businesses say it would hinder their attempts to treat employees fairly. We must defeat it. At the national level, we also have an anachronistic law, the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, that should be repealed. This would ensure that marriages entered into in one state will be recognized by other states. This year, I've again co-sponsored repeal and don't intend to rest until DOMA is erased from the U.S. Code. Madam Speaker, history will judge these efforts at discrimination harshly. It's time for America's political leaders, including members of this body, to catch up.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
To address the House for 1 minute and advise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, if our nation's debt crisis has taught us anything, it's that we need a permanent fiscal solution to keep America the permanent land of the free for our children and grandchildren. There is only one way to bind Congress to such a commitment, and that is a constitutional amendment requiring us to balance the budget. Ordinary spending cuts and pledges to slash the deficit are no longer sufficient. Washington went on a record-breaking spending binge and left Americans in an economic hangover. New taxes, as some propose, would only punish the victim and reward the spenders with more money to waste. We need to stop spending money we don't have and begin living within our means. The future of our nation depends on it. A Washington promise is always temporary. A constitutional amendment is permanent. For the sake of tomorrow's generation, let's get it done today. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
And the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, this week the House passed legislation to reauthorize the Children's Hospital Graduate Medical Education Program. While a celebration should be in order, I'm disappointed the bill was considered on suspension, preventing amendments to improve the program. The bill passed by this chamber fails to correct a glaring mental health parity issue, which prevents inclusion of children's psychiatric teaching hospitals in this program. Because these hospitals are classified by Medicare as psychiatric hospitals rather than children's hospitals, they are ineligible for entry into the program. In order to fix this oversight and address the acute need for additional health care providers trained in child psychiatry, I introduced legislation H.R. 2558, the Children's Hospital Education Equity Act, which would include certain children's psychiatric hospitals in the definition used to determine eligibility. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to correct this inequity and advance our nation another step closer to achieving full mental health parity. Madam Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent to insert into the congressional record an op-ed by Dr. Gregory Fritz, Academic Director at Bradley Hospital in Riverside, Rhode Island, a major teaching affiliate of the Brown University Medical School.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise? And the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to honor an extraordinary woman, a dedicated public servant, and a dear friend, Congresswoman Carrie Meek. Carrie has lived a life of distinction, and her legacy is extensive and incredible. The granddaughter of a slave, Carrie became the first African-American woman to serve in the Florida Senate. My husband, Dexter Layton, and I had the honor of serving with Carrie in the Florida House and then in the Florida Senate. And then Carrie went on to become the first African-American from Florida since Reconstruction elected to Congress. What an honor. While in Congress, Carrie worked vigorously and resolutely for her constituents in all of South Florida, playing an instrumental role in rebuilding our community after the devastation of Hurricane Andrew. Her accomplishments in service to our South Florida community are too many to be enumerated. However, she hasn't rested on her laurels since leaving this chamber. She continues her commitment to service through the Carrie Meek Foundation. I ask my colleagues to join us today in paying tribute to our dear friend, Congresswoman Carrie Meek. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we each talk in this chamber about jobs. The good news is legislation that will create jobs has already been introduced. Now we have to pass it. The American Jobs Act includes $80 billion to repair our aging infrastructure. It would create 3,100 jobs in Western New York alone, rebuilding our roads and bridges, which will encourage private development and even further job creation. Economists have concluded that this bill will create 2 million jobs and keep the U.S. from sliding back into recession. Also, Madam Speaker, according to the Alliance for American Manufacturing, 2.8 million jobs have been lost over the last decade as a result of our trade deficit with China, including 22,000 jobs in Western New York alone. American workers can compete with anyone so long as there is a level playing field, but China is fixing the game through currency manipulation. The Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act would put a stop to that. The time is long past due for this Congress to pass legislation that will create jobs. I urge the House to take up the American Jobs Act and the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act immediately, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Washington rise?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's with tremendous pride that I rise today to reaffirm my deep and unwavering commitment to the State of Israel, our greatest friend and closest ally in the Middle East. This is a country that has celebrated our triumphs and mourned our tragedies, a country that has shared our principles of peace, freedom, and democracy, and most of all, a country that has, without fail, defended America in her darkest hour. As the UN considers recognizing an independent Palestinian state, it is more important now than ever that we stand up, speak out, and oppose this blatant attempt to circumvent direct talks with Israel. I've joined with many other colleagues in a letter to President Obama urging the UN to veto any resolution that grants the Palestinian statehood without direct negotiation with Israel. Peace cannot be created or sustained through a single unilateral decision from the UN. I will continue to urge the UN to veto, and I will stand with tremendous pride and admiration beside our friends in Israel. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise? And the gentlelady is recognized.
Some in Congress want to use the jobs crisis as an excuse to roll back clean air protections that have prevented 200,000 premature deaths. Today, we are debating the TRAIN Act. This is the Republican so-called jobs bill, conducting studies that will do nothing but add paper to landfills instead of creating jobs by upgrading toxic power plants so that they are no longer a threat to public health. The studies have been done. Americans are still breathing mercury, arsenic, and chromium, and we have a means to clean it up. It's called the Clean Air Act, and it was passed in 1963. No matter what anyone says, increased pollution is not a sustainable path to job creation. Instead, we should be saving lives, saving our environment, and investing in the clean tech jobs of the future. The TRAIN Act is a train wreck for Americans.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
I rise to address the House for 1 minute to extend and revise my remarks.
And the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Few come to this Congress with more interest in protecting air and water than myself, as I did as a prosecutor who actually used the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act for the good of the country. But we must find balance. Madam Speaker, I'm here today because I woke up this morning with the thought of steelworkers on my mind. Some of the 1,500 steelworkers whose jobs are now at risk since the Sun Oil Refinery announced last week that it is getting out of the refining business. In essence, the inability to compete because of the over-regulation that we have, and these jobs are going to be shipped overseas. Good, union-paying American jobs that could be here because of the policies that are coming out of Washington are being destroyed and sent overseas. It is counterintuitive. It is counterproductive. We must use common sense. We can't let the rhetoric stand in the way of the reality. We must fight for the future of those jobs while we fight for clean air. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the President has offered a clear path forward to put the country back to work, help small business succeed and hire, provide tax relief for our workers, and rebuild America. The Americans Jobs Act will provide an immediate boost to our economy through job creation and tax relief for American workers and businesses. Specifically, this plan will prevent teachers' layoff and keep firefighters and police officers on the job. It will support the modernization of at least 35,000 public schools across the country to ensure that every student has access to a 21st century education. This plan will create even more jobs by investing in America's crumbling infrastructure, by rebuilding our roads, rebuilding our railways, and rebuilding our airports. Finally, the Americans Jobs Act will cut payroll taxes in half for at least 160 million workers next year, allow more Americans to refinance their homes at today's near 4% interest rates, and provide incentives for employers to hire long-term unemployed workers. Madam Speaker, Americans across the country are counting on this Congress to swiftly act to create jobs and rebuild our economy. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When the health care bill known as Obamacare was being debated in this Congress, Republicans said the bill would bankrupt our country, ration care for seniors, and cost American jobs. Well, that's exactly what will be happening if the new provision of the law goes into effect next week. Unelected Washington bureaucrats have ignored calls from Congress asking for a delay in Medicare cuts to skilled nursing facilities and rehab centers. My colleagues know that I have a reputation for being one of the more fiscally conservative members of Congress. I understand the need for cuts. But as one medical professional recently said, if I'm told I need an amputation, I'd like to know what limb is being cut off. The administration is proposing a reckless cut of nearly 13% to skilled nursing facilities and rehab centers. 80% of the overhead at these facilities is staff, meaning the people who take care of our seniors will be the first to lose their jobs. Receiving a lower quality of care at rehab centers means there's a greater chance that patients will spend more time at a costly hospital, resulting in higher overall cost. Mr. Speaker, this isn't common sense. This policy isn't thinking smart. Our seniors deserve better, and I strongly urge the administration to reconsider their position.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Ask consent to address the House for 1 minute, Madam Speaker, and revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to express my strong support for the artificial pancreas, which will transform the way we treat diabetes in our country. Millions of Americans have diabetes. Diabetes accounts for approximately $174 billion in health care costs in the U.S. each year. 32% of our Medicare expenditures. Studies show that tight control of blood glucose levels significantly reduces or delays the development of diabetic complications. Most patients with diabetes cannot achieve tight glucose control with traditional diabetes tools. Erratic blood glucose levels can cause devastating complications, including kidney failure, blindness, nerve damage, amputations, heart attack, and stroke. The artificial pancreas can allow individuals suffering from diabetes to regulate their blood glucose levels using an insulin pump and a sensor. The system can prevent low and high glucose levels and help individuals with diabetes avoid the worst and most costly complications while allowing them to remain healthy until a cure is found. In April of this year, 250 members of the House, myself included, and 60 senators sent a letter to the FDA urging him to approve the artificial pancreas. I'm encouraged by FDA's response to have the decision by December, and I would hope they would give transformational technology and for the FDA and pancreas studies. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Since this year began, the United States House has put forth measure after measure to incentivize growth and end burdensome regulations, only to see them stall in the Senate and be ignored by the President. 2 years after passage, the stimulus and unemployment remains at staggering levels, despite billions of dollars still sitting in government coffers. It was my hope that the President would move past his stimulus spending proposals and offer real economic relief. While some of the President's proposals put forward in his joint session speech merit consideration, this bill is no substitute for the targeted long-term policies needed to empower private sector investment by facilitating an economic climate where businesses have the confidence to hire workers and take on new endeavors. We're not talking about real pro-growth tax reform and regulatory relief because it sounds good. It's what our economy needs, and badly. It's time for Congress, both chambers, and the President to recognize the pressing need for real tax relief and aggressive regulatory reform. It's time for a new direction, and it's time for action. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland rise? The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I want to commend the President for the American Jobs Act. This bill gets squarely behind the program of putting our country back to work and rebuilding the nation. As you go around and you talk to people, Americans understand implicitly that we've got to rebuild this country and make it strong. That means a lot of things, but first and foremost it means investing in our infrastructure, rebuilding our bridges and tunnels and highways, and this bill would put resources towards that task. Investing in human capital, education, innovation, technology, entrepreneurship. This bill would make sure that teachers go back to work so they can teach our young people in the classroom. Investing in strong communities. This bill would support resources for our firefighters to put more police officers out there on the beat. That's investing in communities. We have to rebuild this country. The American Jobs Act does that. Let's pass the American Jobs Act, put this country back to work. I yield my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Extend.
Gentleman is recognized.
This past weekend, California's Central Valley lost a great leader, a leader in the dairy construction field, a man that has been a supporter to many community causes such as the Education Foundation of Stanislaus County, Center for Human Services, and the Memorial Hospital Foundation. Matt Bruno owned and operated Turlock Dairy and Refrigeration, which employs 65 employees. He played a key role in the expansion of dairy farming in the area. His family grew peaches, almonds, grapes, and he still continued that tradition on the farm where he was raised. He graduated from Ripon High School, was very active in real estate investing and commercial properties, and in 1972 he bought Turlock Refrigeration Center. A year later, bought Turlock-based Miller Dairy Supply. The two companies were merged in 1974. Matt Bruno is survived by his wife Barbara, sons Tony and Matt, 3 grandchildren, brother Ed Bruno of Ripon, and sister Vicki Macelis of Modesto. On this day, the House of Representatives will celebrate his life. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
To address the House for 1 minute, please.
And the gentlelady is recognized.
Republican leaders have made the laughable accusation that the President is engaging in class warfare. What President Obama is actually doing is ending class warfare, the relentless war on the middle class. Since 1983, over 80% of the growth in income has gone to the richest 5% of Americans, while the bottom 60% has lost 7.5% in income, of real income. That's a majority of Americans that are doing worse. When I was growing up, a family could live a middle-class life on one good job, often a good union job, public or private sector, with health benefits and a pension. That was the normal. Seems like the new normal in America, the one that I see the Republicans promoting, is the rich get richer, the middle class is disappearing, and the poor get even poorer. We need to enact bold laws like the President's American Jobs Act and common sense and fair budget proposals, both of which would help restore the middle class, protect the poor, and keep America strong.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Mississippi rise? And the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our nation is faced with 10% unemployment, rising out-of-control deficits. And the Obama administration solution: spend more, tax more, and regulate more. This has created an environment that has destroyed confidence and increased unemployment. Instead, Washington must create an environment favorable to job creation. We must rein in out-of-control spending. This fall, we will vote on a balanced budget amendment that will require Washington to do what families and small businesses already do: live within their means. We must remain focused on relieving the regulations that are choking job creation. And lastly, we must concentrate on tax reform, not tax increases, because increased taxes are the enemy of job creation. The American people don't want more solutions from the federal government. They want the federal government to get out of the way. And if we do those things, we will unleash the American economy and give businesses the confidence they need to grow and to create jobs. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, corporate profits have now reached historically high levels, $2 trillion just in the last 2 quarters. But most of that profit comes from reductions in personnel and benefit costs, which are at a 50-year low as a percent of our economy. This is one of the reasons why the richest 1% earn as much as the bottom 60% and have as much wealth as the bottom 90% of Americans. Tax cuts for the richest, as the House majority demands, is only going to widen this historic disparity. The President's Jobs Act, though, will help to close this gap. Madam Speaker, we're losing our middle class. Our country is becoming divided between the very rich and the rest. That may be good for the financial base of the Republican Party, but it's bad for America. The private sector will start to hire when the public sector shows it has sufficient faith in our future to adequately invest in the physical and the human infrastructure of this country. It takes money, but the future of our middle class is worth it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise? And the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The American people want to be in the business of job creation and growth. Unfortunately, Washington is in the business of regulating, spending, and taxing. This administration has barreled down the road of massive deficits, historic debt, and ridiculous mandates. We all know where that road leads, right off of a cliff. Job creators know that our $14.6 trillion debt is a tax on the American taxpayer. They know that higher taxes mean fewer jobs. And they know that focusing on compliance rather than innovation is a failing business model. But in the face of these difficult times, Americans are optimistic. Not even the worst unemployment since the Great Depression can kill the American spirit. Washington can give job creators confidence by living within its means and reining in the regulatory machine. The American drive to succeed will take care of the rest. Job creators are ready for real growth, not another failed stimulus. Let's pass a balanced budget amendment to require Washington to use common sense just like Americans do. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? And the gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We love you, Carrie Meek, and I'm delighted to rise today to admit that Carrie Meek, Congresswoman Meek, was a mentor to me and someone who drew the admiration of Republicans and Democrats and did some unique and remarkable, if you will, activities here in this Congress. One, as a freshman, she pushed enough to become a member of the Appropriations Committee and led graciously during her tenure. And then she worked very closely with Republicans and Democrats to fight to ensure that cigarette packages had warnings about the negative impact on groups like African Americans. And Carrie, do you remember the picture that we took with Rosa Parks and some of our colleagues and how gracious you were? And do you remember the 25,000 people in Florida when they were trying to overturn affirmative action? And yes, you walked as long and hard as anyone else. So, Carrie, I think the jobs bill that the President has could be named after you, where it provides some 80% compensation to small businesses to hire people. That sounds like Carrie Meek. And I think we can resolve the CR and provide for those who have suffered disasters and do the right thing. That sounds like Carrie Meek. So I'm here to pay tribute to our friend Carrie Meek and to thank her for sending her son Kendrick, who was a great friend, and to let you know that we need to follow in the pathway of Carrie Meek that brings us all together, to pass the jobs bill, a bill that could be really named after you, and as well to ensure that we protect those who have been harmed by disasters. Thank you, Congresswoman Carrie Meek. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana rise? The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This House and this Congress needs to be focused on job creation. In fact, this House has passed scores of legislation out of the House over to the Senate that would create millions of American jobs, yet the Senate refuses to take any action on them. And what do we get from the President? We get more of the same class warfare and failed stimulus legislation. Of course, his first stimulus was such a disaster. We had a hearing last week that exposed this Solyndra scandal. That's the company that the President used as the poster child for the stimulus bill 2 years ago. And what happened? The taxpayers are on the hook right now for over $530 million of money that was thrown away by this company that the President called a year ago the future of this country. Well, I don't want a future of bankruptcy. I don't want a future of scandal. I don't want a future of the radical regulations and the class warfare that this President has given to this country. We need to create American jobs. We need to get these crazy regulations off the backs of our small business owners and create jobs in America. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? And the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank Frederica Wilson for organizing the We Love Carrie Meek 1 Minute. Carrie, I want to make sure that you understand that this is not funereal, and they've kind of made it sound that way. This is a tribute to you. And since you and I came here together along with Jim Clyburn and Corinne Brown and Sanford Bishop and Eddie Bernice Johnson and Benny Thompson halfway since he came a little bit later, I speak for them as well. Eddie Bernice could not be here, but asked that I recite a portion of her remarks, and that is that your career in the House was distinguished as well as that in the state level. Almost immediately, the Congresswoman established herself as a champion of expanding federal programs to create jobs and providing initiatives for African-American business owners. In a battle that is still being fought today, Congresswoman Meek passionately opposed cuts to social welfare programs in the 90s to prevent the financial burden from being carried on the backs of the middle class and the disadvantaged. I have the distinction of offering Eddie Bernice's full remarks and the compliments and congratulations from all of our class that came here in 1992, and an even greater distinction of speaking with Carrie perhaps as much or more than most of the members with regularity, and sharing with her the number of jokes and a number of anecdotes that we have together. I, as well as all of us, are proud of you, Carrie, and the enormous work that you have done and that you will continue to do through the foundation. And thanks again for sending Kendrick to us as well. I yield back the balance of my time.
And the chair would remind members that they will address their comments through the chair. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 406 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 74, House Resolution 406. Resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 2401, to require analyses of the cumulative and incremental impacts of certain rules and actions of the Environmental Protection Agency and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 2 hours, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce now printed in the bill. The committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House or on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill, and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion, except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
And the gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for purpose of debate only, and I also ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days during which they may revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. This resolution provides for a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 2401, the Transparency in Regulatory Analysis of Impacts on the Nation. Fortunately, the anagram comes to TRAIN, so it's the TRAIN Act of 2011. It makes in order 12 specific amendments out of the 14 that were received by the Rules Committee. Of the 2 not made, one was withdrawn by the sponsor and the other was not germane to the rules of the House. So what the Rules Committee has presented here is a rule that's, quite frankly, not bad. It is going to provide for an open discussion of those who are interested in this particular issue on the floor. It's a very fair rule, and it continues the record of the Rules Committee in this Congress of making as many amendments in order as possible, which simply conform to the rules of the House. That's been the goal of our chairman, Mr. Dreyer, and say what you will, he has produced a standard of fairness in the floor discussions that we will be having here on the floor in the past as well as in the future. There are a lot of people that say Congress is simply dysfunctional. Now, I admit the system was designed to be complex, but there are a lot of people, especially those that have very little contact with this system, that simply stand up and say, why can't you just reach across the aisle, find some compromise, and work in a bipartisan manner? To those people who are continually asking for that, you got it. it's here today in this particular bill. The discussion draft of this bill was a bipartisan bill with a Republican and Democrat sponsor. First hearings of this bill were done back in April, so they have done their due diligence in studying the issue and working the bill, to the point that they actually scrapped the first bill and reintroduced another one, once again with a bipartisan sponsorship of the bill. You look at the co-sponsors on this bill, you will find Republicans and Democrats. Even in the final vote in committee, one Republican voted against it, and 29% of the Democrats voting actually voted for it. This is a process to be envied. If you want a good system, a bill that comes through in a bipartisan manner, this is it. We all know that business is impacted by both legislation and regulation. And sometimes the blatant disregard for the cumulative negative impacts of onerous and sometimes overlapping new rules and regulations have had a disastrous effect on industry and on jobs. The current EPA appears to be driven to regulatory excess by asserting powers or controls in an area where that power and control has never been expressly delegated to the agency by Congress. So, Madam Speaker, while I'm sure that every member wants to have clean air and clean water, and all Americans want clean air and clean water, they are vital objectives and laudable goals. However, I also think that many would agree that some of the current issues in some areas have gone beyond what Congress ever intended or ever improved, and also far beyond common sense. It has not helped the economic health of this particular country, which is why I commend the sponsors, both sides of the aisle, who recognize this problem and have come up with this legislation to fix the problem. The underlying bill, H.R. 2401, simply says to the EPA and potentially other agencies, stop, slow down. Take a more careful look at what you're doing or proposing to do. Take a serious and methodical look at whether or not what you're doing is duplicative of rules and regulations already on the books, whether or not they are overlapping and confusing or contradictory rules and regulations to those already on the books. Tells them to do an analysis of alternative strategies that may be used to avoid damage to our fragile environment as well as our fragile economy. This bill tells EPA and others that before certain draft regulations go into effect, that it actually needs to study and consider the cumulative impacts of these new rules and regulations on energy production, on costs, on jobs, on our nation's global competitiveness. Imagine that. Imagine a federal agency seeking to institute rules and regulations which actually took the time to study the impacts of those plans and rules and regulations first. Who could oppose such a concept? It is just common sense. There will be some that will complain when the bill is discussed on the floor, maybe even here on the rule itself. This goal is to dismantle the EPA and dismantle other organizations. No programs are cut by this process. Nothing is changed by this progress. Some will stand up and say, oh, it's going to be a biased study. There are no limits to what the agencies can study. What this bill simply does is it makes sure that what has been ignored in the past is no longer ignored. Are there some specific things that have to be considered? Yeah, that's right. Because we specifically identified what has been ignored. There is nothing in this bill that forbids any rules or regulations. It just says for the agencies, for heaven's sakes, get the facts first. This bill holds the executive branch agencies accountable and forces them to be reasonable and actually study what they're doing before they implement it. This is a good bill, and it is a very good rule, and I'd urge adoption of both. Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Utah reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong opposition to H.R. 2401. I do thank my colleague, Mr. Bishop, for granting the time for the opposition. This bill is really another attempt by the Republican leadership to demonize the Environmental Protection Agency and dismantle any government regulation intended to protect our nation's public health and the environment. H.R. 2401 is a waste of time and an absolute insult to the millions of Americans without jobs. Instead of crafting legislation to increase consumer confidence, instead of helping Americans hold on to their homes, instead of creating jobs for the millions of people who are unemployed, instead of relieving the burden of the middle class by making the tax code more fair, my friends on the other side are asking us to vote on a bill that effectively bars the EPA from finalizing and implementing two of the most significant air quality regulations in decades. Coal plants, and let me lay my bona fides out here, I do believe in clean coal. It's the biggest source of unregulated mercury emissions in the United States. They pump out 48 tons of emissions every year. Mercury contaminates more than 6 million acres of freshwater lakes. And I want to just take the prerogative of talking about one. I was born in Altamont Springs, Florida, and the nearest lake to where I was born was called Mobile, or is called Mobile. At one point, my grandfather could pass by and say to my grandmother, "I'm going down to the lake and catch some fish," and be guaranteed that that was going to be the case and bring it back home in short time. Now that lake is dead, and it's because of mercury contamination that lake is dead. 46,000 miles of streams, and the stream that led into Lake Mobile is dead. And 225,000 acres of wetlands across the United States, and all 50 states have some type of fish consumption advisory. Let me repeat that. All 50 states have some type of fish consumption advisory. What's more, there are substantial economic benefits to these clean air rules that my friends are trying to block. The EPA estimates that the mercury and air toxic standards alone could generate more than 30,000 construction jobs and 9,000 long-term utility jobs benefiting steel makers, pipe fitters, boiler makers, and others. The economic value of air quality improvements totals $59 billion to $140 billion annually. That's 25,300 lives lost to toxic air pollution, over 11,000 heart attacks, more than 12,000 asthma attacks, and a significant portion of them being children, over 12,200 additional visits to the emergency rooms of our country, and hundreds of thousands of missed work days. Overall, the EPA predicts that the monetary value of protecting Americans' health through implementing the Clean Air Act is projected to reach $2 trillion in 2020 alone. Yet this bill ignores those benefits. Madam Speaker, all of us know that times are tough, but this great nation has been through tough economic times before. Environmental regulations are not the problem. The economy was really tough, and we are reminded of it often by our colleagues under President Carter. Yet the EPA at that time managed to set new national air pollution standards for airborne lead and began the phase-out of ozone layer-destroying gases from aerosol spray products. Nor has protecting the environment always been a partisan issue. The EPA has also had great successes under Republican presidents. Upon founding the EPA in 1970, President Richard Nixon said the following: "We can no longer afford to consider air and water common property, free to be abused by anyone without regard to the consequences. Instead, we should begin now to treat them as scarce resources, which we are no more free to contaminate than we are free to throw garbage into our neighbor's yard." That was in 1970. One of the first tasks assigned to the EPA was to enforce the Clean Air Act. also signed by President Nixon. Since its adoption, these regulations have prevented an estimated 200,000 premature deaths. During President Reagan's administration, the EPA tested elementary and secondary schools for asbestos for the first time and named protecting endangered wetlands a top priority while subsequently opening the new Office of Wetlands Protection. And contrary to what many of my friends across the history did not end with President Reagan. President George H.W. Bush implemented the new cap-and-trade policies that successfully addressed the growing problem of acid rain. President Bush's EPA also started the wildly successful Energy Star program, helping Americans save money through adopting energy-efficient products and practices. Since then, Energy Star has saved Americans $17 billion on utility bills. And on a more personal level, I grew up at times with asthma, as did a cousin of mine who still suffers the effects of it. Several of the employees that work with me now and some before have had asthma, and I genuinely believe that if we did not have the clean air standards that we have today, some of us may not be here. In light of all these accomplishments, it's clear that H.R. 2041 is nothing more than an effort at the behest of a big set of businesses to delay and block necessary and important regulations that will keep our country safe and clean. Republicans claim that this bill assists agencies with their economic analysis of EPA regulations. This is nothing more than a convenient ad hoc justification. Firstly, all major regulations already receive years of extensive cost-benefit analysis before implementation. At the same time, this bill fails to take into account any of the health and environmental benefits of the regulations in question, rendering the one-sided cost-only analysis set forth by this bill unnecessary. Second, the version of the Energy and Commerce that was reported out suspends two major regulations that have been the subject of analysis, litigation, re-examination, and rewriting for over 2 decades. Both the National Environmental Policy Act and the Executive Order 12,866, signed by President Clinton, require federal agencies to perform the type of analysis required in the bill, including a comprehensive cost-benefit analysis. By requiring unnecessary and duplicative studies, my friends on the other side could not make their desire to indefinitely block these regulations any more clear. I've introduced an amendment that carves out an exception for rules and regulations drafted in adherence to the rules already on the books, freeing these important regulations to proceed along as scheduled. Madam Speaker, based on what I've seen by this Republican-led Congress, it's clear to me that they obviously have no intention of using their real power to create jobs. Instead, they prefer to waste time on measures such as this bill that are designed to do one simple thing, and that is to further delay both past and future regulations. Now, let me make it clear. I've quarreled, as have some of my colleagues, with the Environmental Protection Agency, as rightly we should, when the circumstances permit. And that is, in my case, with the numeric nutrient standards that are proposed in Florida. A court has made a decision regarding the enforcement of those nutrient standards, and I believe that the communities involved are prepared to undertake to do what's necessary. And I do not believe that EPA has to involve itself at this point in time. But when I quarrel with EPA, as I do, I don't do it in a way that demonizes the agency. I do it in a way that's looking for a solution. One thing that I've learned in the years that I've been in this institution is that whether you have a right or left or center ideological perspective, to begin demonizing certain people suggests to me that those people probably have been successful. I don't know Lisa Jackson, the Environmental Protection Agency cabinet official, but I do know that the way people are screaming about the work that she has done suggests that she must be having some success. It's time to call my friends out on the other side for their shenanigans and show the American people that they are more interested in helping big business and the wealthy than the middle class and working poor Americans who continue to struggle all across this nation every single day. If we start cutting the regulations that protect the environment when we are down, where will we be when we recover? I've seen firsthand what happens in places that disregard environmental protections for the sake of business. I remember being in Xi'an, China, with a departed colleague, Gerald Solomon, who was chair of the Rules Committee, and holding my hand in front of my face and not being able to see it. Also had that same experience in Los Angeles, California, in the late 1950s. This certainly is not the kind of home that we want to leave for our grandchildren. The air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the soil on which we produce our crops is the earth that we call home, and in my view, we must keep it clean. Let me tell you what Ronald Reagan said. If we've learned any lessons during the past few decades, perhaps the most important is that preservation of our environment is not a partisan challenge. It's common sense. Our physical health, our social happiness, and our economic well-being will be sustained only by all of us working in partnership as thoughtful, effective stewards of our natural resources. President Reagan made those remarks on signing an annual report of the Council on Environmental Quality. Additionally, he said in a radio address that I'm proud of having been one of the first to recognize that states and the federal government have a duty to protect our natural resources from the damaging effects of pollution that can accompany industrial development. And more importantly, what he said is, what is a conservative after all but one who conserves, one who is committed to protecting and holding close the things by which we live. And we want to protect and conserve the land on which we live, our countryside, our rivers and mountains, our plains and meadows and forests. This is our patrimony. This is what we leave to our children. And our great moral responsibility is to leave it to them either as we found it or better than we found it. He made those remarks at the dedication of the National Geographic Society new headquarters building in 1984. President George W. Bush said, our country, the United States, is the world's largest emitter of man-made greenhouse gases. We account for almost 20% of the world's man-made greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, in a joint address to Congress, he said, I also call on Congress to work with my administration to achieve the significant emission reductions made possible by implementing the clean energy technologies proposed in our energy plan. Our working group study has made it clear that we need to do a lot more. Those words from two presidents that are revered rightly by many of us in this institution, and certainly by my colleagues that are Republican that share the same ideological perspectives should be sufficient to put the rest on this polluting bill that we could rename the Toxic Polluting America measure. I reserve the balance of my time.